My brother called me jealous. My parents believed him until the police opened the safe. My brother called me jealous while my mother's missing necklace was lying less than 30 feet beneath us. I did not know that then. I only knew that the velvet box in front of my mother was empty, that Evan had stopped smiling, and that my father had begun rubbing the bridge of his nose the way he did whenever the truth threatened to inconvenience him. We were in my parents' dining room on a Sunday evening, seated around the walnut table my grandfather had built when Hale and Finch Jewelers was still one narrow shop between a cobbler and a butcher. The table had survived 2 moves, 1 flood, and decades of family arguments. That night, it held roast chicken, untouched wine, and the first piece of evidence I had been foolish enough to present without a witness. "Mom, when did you last see the lark pendant?" I asked. My mother, Diane Hale, touched the hollow at her throat. The pendant had belonged to her mother. It was an Art Nouveau lark made from seed pearls and pale sapphires, beautiful more because Grandma Celeste had worn it every Sunday than because an appraiser had valued it at $42,000. "At Christmas, perhaps?" She looked into the box again, as if the necklace might appear out of embarrassment. "Evan took several pieces to the store for updated insurance photographs." Across from me, Evan sliced his chicken with slow precision. At 38, he had perfected the expression of a patient man burdened by a difficult younger sister. He wore our father's old signet ring and a navy jacket that made him look ready for a magazine profile about inheriting a legacy. "I returned everything," he said. "I placed 3 printed inventory sheets beside the empty box. The pendant isn't the only item that never came back. Aunt Miriam's emerald clips are missing from the consignment register. So is the Varela watch. The system shows each item transferred to secondary storage, but there are no receiving signatures. All 3 transfers were approved under your login." My father looked at the papers but did not touch them. "You still have access to the system?" That was his concern. Not the missing jewelry, my access. "I had reporting access because I built the inventory controls," I said. "Evan removed it Thursday, after I asked him about the gaps." "Because you were searching for a problem," Evan replied. His voice stayed calm. Mine had begun to tighten, which made his calmness look like innocence. Claire has had trouble adjusting since the board chose me as managing director. There it was. The story he had been preparing before I knew I needed one of my own. I had worked at Hale and Finch for 11 years. I had rebuilt our catalog after the old software corrupted thousands of records, introduced dual signature transfers, and earned a graduate certificate in provenance research because our clients trusted us with objects whose histories mattered as much as their prices. Evan had spent 6 years in luxury marketing, returned when Dad's heart condition worsened, and become managing director within 9 months. I had been hurt. I had also trained him. "This is not about the board," I said. 3 high-value items are unaccounted for. 1 belongs to Mom, 2 belong to clients. We have a legal duty to report the discrepancy. Evan leaned back. "You hear yourself, don't you? You lost the promotion, so now you're implying I'm a thief." "I'm saying the records need to be audited." "You're jealous, Claire." He said it gently, almost sadly. The word landed exactly where he wanted it to. My mother closed the velvet box. "Your brother has carried this family through a difficult year." "So have I." "That isn't the point," Dad said. "You have been angry for months. We all see it." I looked from one parent to the other and understood that Evan had not invented a lie from nothing. He had taken a real bruise and pressed on it until my pain became proof against me. "Call our insurer," I said. "Authorize an independent inventory. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize in writing and resign." Evan gave a short laugh. Dramatic as always. "And if I'm right?" No one answered. I gathered the copies, leaving the empty box with my mother. As I reached the hallway, Dad told me not to return to the store until we had all cooled down. Evan offered to walk me out. I refused. At the front door, I glanced toward the basement stairs. A fresh scrape marked the baseboard, and 2 parallel grooves crossed the runner, as if something very heavy had recently been dragged below. My parents had owned an old steel safe for as long as I could remember. It usually stood in Dad's workshop at the lake house, too stubborn and obsolete to move. 3 days earlier, my father had complained that Evan had insisted on bringing it back to town because the lake house would be empty all winter. At the time, I had barely listened. That night, standing in the cold while the lock clicked behind me, I remembered every word. People imagine favoritism as a series of obvious cruelties. One child receives a car, the other a lecture. One child is praised, the other ignored. In our family, it was quieter. Evan's mistakes were temporary, mine were character traits. His ambition was leadership, mine was impatience. When he left, he was brave. When I stayed, I was dependable, which was praise until a reward had to be assigned. Hale and Finch had begun with my grandfather repairing watches under a green awning. My father expanded into estate jewelry and private collections. My mother ran the books, remembered every client's birthday, and could identify Georgian paste from across a room. Evan loved the polished counters and holiday parties. I loved the locked-back room where history waited in acid-free boxes. When I was 26, a client challenged the ownership of a diamond brooch her late husband had consigned. The paper file contained 2 contradictory receipts and a handwritten note no one could interpret. I spent 4 days tracing auction catalogs and insurance photographs until I proved the brooch had belonged to the client's mother, not her husband's estate. We returned it before litigation began. Dad called me his secret weapon. Secret weapons, I later learned, are valuable partly because no one has to see them. Evan returned during Dad's cardiac rehabilitation. He arrived with expensive coffee, a presentation about modernizing the Hale legacy, and the ability to make my parents feel that his homecoming was a sacrifice. He redesigned our website, hired a photographer, and persuaded a local society magazine to feature him beside our grandfather's workbench. Sales rose. So did expenses, unexplained discounts, and after-hours inventory movements. I noticed small irregularities first. A platinum bracelet was photographed on a Tuesday, but entered into storage on Wednesday with no overnight location. A pair of signed cufflinks appeared in a client newsletter before the consignment agreement was finalized. Evan dismissed each issue as the price of moving faster. "Controls should protect the business," he told me once, "not suffocate it." I replied that a lock only felt insulting to the person trying to bypass it. That sentence traveled through the family as evidence of my hostility. After the board named him managing director, I remained head of collections and compliance. On paper, we were equals with different responsibilities. In practice, he began approving exceptions without telling me. He cultivated my staff with lunches and described my procedures as Claire's little rituals. When I objected, Dad encouraged me to support my brother instead of competing with him. Then Mrs. Varela called. Her husband had left her a rare rose gold chronograph. She had consigned it reluctantly because her granddaughter needed specialized medical care. The watch was supposed to be shown privately to 2 collectors, not advertised. Mrs. Varela wanted it returned. The system showed the watch in secondary storage. The cabinet was empty. I checked the physical ledger, access logs, photography room, repair bench, outgoing shipment records, and insurer portal. The transfer entry had been made at 9:14 p.m. on a Saturday under Evan's login. There was no second authorization, though our policy required one. Evan said he had moved the watch for a prospective buyer and would resolve it. 48 hours later, he produced a scanned receiving form bearing the initials of Miles Keene, our senior appraiser. Miles had been in Montreal that weekend. When I showed Evan the travel schedule, his face changed for less than a second. Then he smiled. "You have too much time on your hands." The next morning, my access was restricted. I began keeping copies outside the company network. I did not take customer financial records, only audit trails related to items under my compliance responsibility. I emailed myself meeting summaries and photographed the sign-in book. That choice later saved me. It also gave Evan the material he needed to paint me as obsessive. My parents knew I was concerned. What they heard was that I resented his authority. Evan told them I questioned every decision, monitored his movements, and frightened staff with talk of criminal liability. Each statement contained enough truth to survive casual inspection. After the Sunday dinner, my mother called. For one hopeful second, I thought she had reconsidered. Instead, she asked me to return my store keys. "Temporarily," she said, "until you can separate your feelings from the business." A client's watch is missing. Evan says a buyer has it on memorandum. Then ask to see the memorandum. Silence. "Mom, did you authorize moving Grandpa's safe into your basement?" Her breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "Dad mentioned it. What is inside?" "Old records, family things. Evan is reorganizing storage." "Please don't let him remove anything." Her voice hardened. "This is exactly what we mean, Claire. You are making ordinary things sound sinister." She ended the call before I could answer. 3 days later, someone broke into Hale & Finch using my access code. The call came at 5:17 on Thursday morning. My father did not ask where I was. He asked whether I had been at the store. I sat up in bed, fully awake before he finished the question. Rain tapped the windows of my apartment. "No, why?" "The alarm was disarmed at 1:08 with your code. The rear door was opened. Several trays are gone." I had returned my brass keys to my mother, but the alarm code should have been disabled with my access. I said so. "Police are here," Dad replied. "You need to come in." By the time I arrived, 2 patrol cars blocked the alley. The rear door showed a splintered frame, but the damage looked wrong. The wood had broken outward toward the alley, as if struck from inside. I stopped before stepping across the threshold and photographed it. Detective Lena Ortiz noticed. She was compact, gray-streaked, and observant in a way that made performance useless. "You work here?" "Until Sunday, head of collections and compliance." Evan emerged from the stockroom. He looked exhausted, though his hair was neatly combed. My mother followed him with both hands over her mouth. The missing inventory included loose diamonds, 6 vintage watches, and 9 consignment pieces. The preliminary value exceeded $600,000. The thief had ignored silver, modern retail stock, and anything with tracking tags. They had known exactly which drawers mattered. They had also opened my old desk. An officer found a padded envelope in the bottom drawer containing $18,000 in cash and Mrs. Varella's missing watch. My mother sat down. I did not touch the envelope. "That was not there when I left Sunday." Evan stared at me as if he no longer recognized his sister. It was an excellent performance because he did not overplay it. Dad was less careful. "How could you do this?" Detective Ortiz raised a hand. "No one is making conclusions yet. Ms. Hale, I'll need you to answer some questions." I answered all of them. I explained my code, the access restriction, the inventory concerns, and the copies I had preserved. I gave her my phone without deleting anything and consented to a search of my apartment. I told her the rear door appeared to have been damaged from inside. Evan called that an accusation. Ortiz called it an observation. Security video offered little help. The interior cameras had stopped recording at 12:46 a.m. The alley camera showed a hooded figure moving through rain, face hidden, carrying 2 equipment cases. The alarm log identified my code, but the system stored only the number entered, not the identity of the person entering it. My code had been based on Grandma Celeste's birthday. Evan knew it. Everyone in the family did. Still, evidence does not need to be conclusive to destroy a relationship. It only needs to confirm what people are prepared to believe. By noon, Dad had placed me on administrative leave. By evening, the board had suspended me. The next morning, a local website reported that a family insider was being questioned. My name appeared in the comments before lunch. Evan did not publicly accuse me. That would have been risky. He told employees to avoid speculation and said the family was devastated. Privately, he explained to our parents that I had planted the watch because my effort to expose him had failed. According to him, I had staged the burglary to prove his management was careless and intended to discover the stolen goods later. The theory was absurdly complicated, My parents accepted it because the simpler alternative required them to examine their son. They came to my apartment on Saturday. Mom cried. Dad remained standing. "If you return what was taken," he said, "we can ask the prosecutor to consider treatment instead of prison." "Treatment for what?" "Whatever made you do this." I looked at my mother. "Do you believe I stole Grandma's necklace?" She whispered, "I don't know what to believe." It was the most honest and the most painful thing she had said. I showed them a receipt proving I had been in a 24-hour pharmacy at 1:11 a.m. buying medication for a migraine. The store was 9 miles away, and its camera clearly showed me at the register. Dad said I could have given my code to someone else. I showed them that my phone remained connected to my home router before and after the purchase, that I had no unexplained deposits, and that I had voluntarily opened my home to police. Each answer caused the accusation to change shape. Finally, I asked about the safe. Dad's jaw tightened. "Leave that alone." "Why?" "Because it contains private family papers, and Evan says you have become fixated on it." "Evan moved it 3 days before the burglary." "Your grandfather's safe has nothing to do with this." "Then opening it should prove that." Dad walked to the door. Mom followed, pausing only long enough to say she loved me. Love, I discovered, could remain present while trust was removed. It did not make the absence easier. After they left, I called Detective Ortiz. I told her about the safe, the grooves on the basement runner, and my mother's description of old records. Ortiz did not promise anything. "A safe is not probable cause," she said, "but movement is a fact. Keep giving me facts." So I stopped trying to convince my family and began assembling facts for someone willing to test them. Evan understood people better than systems. He knew which compliment my father wanted, which apology my mother would accept, which version of a story made a room feel comfortable. But he treated records as if they were obedient. They are not. Records remember the parts of us we assume no one will compare. My lawyer, Priya Shah, helped me sort what I had copied legally from what belonged to the company. We created a timeline using meeting notes, inventory reports, and emails sent to my own account in the ordinary course of work. I did not access Hale and Finch's network after my suspension. I wanted no victory that could be contaminated by trespass. The first useful discrepancy involved the camera outage. Evan had told police that our vendor performed a remote update at midnight. An invoice in my records showed the update was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ortiz obtained confirmation from the vendor. No one on their team had connected that night. Instead, an administrator inside the store had disabled recording. There were 3 administrator accounts. Mine had been deactivated Sunday. Dad had forgotten his password months earlier. Evan's account remained active. The second discrepancy involved insurance. 2 weeks before the burglary, Evan had increased the coverage rider on loose stones and vintage watches. That was not illegal. It was also not routine. He told Dad the adjustment was required for holiday inventory, though the holiday season had ended. The third came from Miles Keene. Miles had worked for my grandfather before either Evan or I could see over the counters. He was cautious to the point of superstition, never carrying more than one high-value item at a time. When I asked about the receiving form bearing his initials, he went pale. "I never signed that," he said. He had kept his boarding pass and hotel receipt from Montreal. Priya advised him to speak directly with police. He did. Then Mrs. Varela called me. Evan had offered to replace her missing watch with a different piece plus cash if she signed a confidentiality agreement. She thought it was strange. I asked her not to send me the agreement and referred her to Ortiz. Within a week, the detective had evidence of forged documentation, a suspicious insurance increase, false information about the cameras, and a planted item in my desk. It still did not prove where the stolen property had gone. The safe stayed in my parents' basement. I knew because my mother sent me a photograph by accident. She meant to send a picture of a cracked pipe beneath the basement stairs. In the background, behind a stack of moving blankets, stood the gray corner of the old safe. A new electronic lock had been bolted over the original dial. Beside it lay 2 black equipment cases, similar to those carried by the hooded figure in the alley footage. I enlarged the image until the pixels blurred. One case had a white shipping label. I could make out only 4 letters: Oryx. Oryx Protective Transit was a courier service used by jewelers. We had closed our account with them 2 years earlier after Evan complained about their fees. I searched my old email and found the cancellation confirmation, then forwarded it to Ortiz. She contacted Oryx with a subpoena. Someone had reopened the account 6 months earlier using Hale and Finch's tax information and a private email address. 3 shipments had gone to auction dealers in other states. The sender was listed as E. Hall, an abbreviation Evan sometimes used when he did not want clients confused by the family name. One shipment contained a pair of emerald clips matching Aunt Miriam's consignment description. Another contained 2 watches reported stolen in the burglary. Both dealers had photographed the packages upon arrival. The labels tied them to the reopened account. That was enough to search Evan's office, home, vehicle, and financial accounts. It was not yet enough to search my parents' house. Evan did not live there. My parents claimed the safe held only family documents, and the photograph of equipment cases could not establish their contents. When police searched Evan's condominium, they found designer furniture, overdue bills, and no jewelry. His bank records showed gambling transfers disguised as payments to a marketing consultant. He owed more than $400,000 to private lenders. His phone had been wiped remotely hours before officers arrived. He told my parents I had manufactured the courier trail. They believed him again, though less comfortably. Dad called Priya to demand that I stop harassing the family. She put him on speaker with my permission. "Claire has cooperated with every lawful request," Priya said. "If you want the investigation resolved, preserve all property and communications." "My son says she can manipulate those records," Dad replied. "Then independent records will either support her or expose her. That is what an investigation does." Dad had no answer to that. He ended the call. 2 nights later, someone entered my apartment while I was having dinner with Priya. Nothing obvious was taken. Drawers had been opened, folders shifted, and my laptop turned upside down. The intruder had ignored jewelry and cash. They wanted documents. The building camera captured a man in a maintenance cap using a copied entry fob. He kept his face down, but when he left, his sleeve rode up. A dark, crescent-shaped birthmark showed on his wrist. Evan had the same mark. Detective Ortiz did not arrest Evan for the apartment entry. The image was suggestive, not definitive, and the copied fob had been discarded in a public trash bin. She added it to the timeline and asked whether I had somewhere else to stay. Priya gave me the key to her guest room. Leaving my apartment with 1 suitcase felt like losing a second home to my brother. The first had been my parents' house, where every childhood photograph now seemed to testify for him. The second was the private life I had built outside the family business. Evan had reached into both and made safety feel conditional. Public suspicion carried its own cost. 2 museum clients canceled consultations. A former classmate sent a message asking whether I was okay, and then forwarded my reply to a gossip page. At the grocery store, a Hale and Finch customer recognized me and moved her handbag to the other arm. Evan flourished in sympathy. He gave a brief television interview outside the store, speaking about betrayal without naming me. My father stood behind him. My mother did not appear, but she sent flowers to the staff. For 3 days, I watched the clip repeatedly. Then Priya took my phone. "You are trying to find the sentence that will make this fair," she said. "It isn't in the interview." She was right. Fairness would have to be constructed from slower materials. Ortiz's team recovered deleted cloud backups linked to Evan's phone. Most were ordinary: restaurant reservations, photographs, marketing drafts. One folder contained scans of my mother's signature. Another held a blank Hale and Finch transfer form, layered beneath Miles Keene's initials. A third contained a photograph of my alarm code, written on an old emergency contact card. The backups strengthened the fraud case, but Evan claimed he stored signatures for business documents, and that the code photograph predated my suspension. His attorney described the gambling payments as private, embarrassing, and irrelevant. Then, the insurer found something worse. Evan had filed a preliminary loss schedule only 40 minutes after police arrived. It included exact serial numbers and valuations for the stolen pieces. That preparation might have seemed efficient, except 3 serial numbers were wrong in the current inventory system. They matched an export created 6 weeks earlier. The thief had worked from an old list. I remembered printing that export for an insurance review Evan later canceled. I had left it in a blue folder on his desk. Ortiz asked where Evan might have hidden physical records or property on short notice. I told her about the lake house, our parents' basement, 2 commercial storage units, and the unused apartment above the store. Each location required its own legal basis. Investigations move more slowly than fear because they have to survive the day someone tries to dismantle them in court. My mother moved more quickly. She called at 2:03 one morning, whispering, "Claire, the safe is making a sound." I sat up in Priya's guest bed. "What kind of sound?" "A beep every minute. Evan installed a keypad. He said the battery must be low. He is coming tomorrow." "Do not open it. Do not move it. Call Detective Ortiz." "Your father will be furious." "Mom, why are you calling me?" For several seconds, I heard only her breathing. "I found my necklace box in Evan's car last week," she said. "It was empty. He said he was taking it to be relined." The explanation was possible. That was how he survived. Every individual fact had an innocent interpretation. Only the pattern told the truth. "Take a picture of the safe in the basement room without touching anything," I said. "Then go upstairs and lock your bedroom door." She began to cry. "What if we were wrong about you?" I could have answered cruelly. Some part of me wanted to. Instead, I said, "Call Ortiz. We can talk about everything else when you're safe." My mother called the detective. She also admitted that Evan had asked my parents to store several cases after the burglary because the store was not secure. Dad had objected, but Evan said the cases contained confidential client files that should not be seen by police before lawyers reviewed them. He placed them in the old safe and changed the lock. That statement changed the legal landscape. My mother had direct knowledge that Evan controlled the safe and had loaded containers into it immediately after the crime. Ortiz drafted an affidavit before dawn. Evan arrived at my parents' house at 8 the next morning. A patrol car was already parked outside. He claimed he had come to replace the keypad battery. Officers instructed him not to enter the basement. He called Dad from the driveway and said I had manipulated Mom during a panic attack. Dad ordered my mother to retract her statement. She refused. It was the first time in my life I knew of her refusing him on anything important. By noon, Evan's attorney had filed an emergency objection to the search request, arguing that the safe contained privileged business records and belonged to my father. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following morning. For one more night, the safe remained closed. But for the first time, my parents were no longer standing on the same side of it. The hearing took place in a small courtroom with bad acoustics and no drama except the kind created by facts spoken in the correct order. Evan sat beside his attorney in a charcoal suit. He did not look at me. My father sat behind him. My mother sat on the opposite end of the same bench, leaving a space between them wide enough for a lifetime of avoided questions. Detective Ortiz testified that the burglary alarm had been disabled with my code after my access was revoked, that the cameras had been manually shut down through Evan's administrator account, that stolen pieces were shipped through a courier account linked to his private email, and that my mother saw him place cases into the safe after the burglary. She described the pre-prepared insurance schedule and the forged memorandum for Mrs. Varela's watch. Evan's attorney attacked each fact separately. Administrator credentials could be stolen. Email addresses could be spoofed. A mother frightened by family conflict could misunderstand what she saw. The safe belonged to Martin Hale, who was not a suspect. Priya had warned me this would happen. A defense lawyer's job was to cut the pattern into pieces and invite the judge to examine each one alone. Then, Oryx Protective Transit's compliance officer testified by video. The reopened account had required a live identity check. The company retained a recording. Evan's face appeared on screen holding his driver's license and confirming the private email address. My father's posture changed. The judge asked one question. Did the account ship property later reported stolen? Yes, Your Honor. The warrant was signed at 11:42 a.m. Police could have excluded us from the search, but my parents were occupants of the home and were allowed to remain upstairs. Ortiz asked me to wait outside unless officers needed identification of specific property. I stood near the hydrangeas under a colorless sky while a locksmith carried equipment through the front door. Evan was ordered to stay away from the house. He remained across the street with his attorney, making calls from the passenger seat of a black sedan. Once he looked toward me. The sadness was gone. What remained was not fear exactly. It was fury that I had refused the role he wrote for me. The safe resisted the keypad override. Grandpa had purchased it from a bank renovation in the 1970s, and beneath Evan's electronic lock remained a mechanical system built to outlast fashion and several generations of Hales. The locksmith estimated 2 hours. During that wait, my father came outside. He looked older than he had at dinner a month earlier. Your mother says you told her to call the police. I did. You could have called me first. You told her to retract the statement. He flinched. I was trying to keep the family from destroying itself. You kept choosing the version that required nothing from you. His eyes filled, but I felt no relief. I had imagined this moment during sleepless nights, my father uncertain, me finally eloquent enough to make him understand. In reality, understanding arrived without triumph. It looked like a tired man standing on damp grass while strangers drilled into his father's safe. Evan says the courier account was for confidential sales, he said. The court just heard otherwise. He says there are explanations. Then let the evidence test them. Dad looked toward the house. And if the safe is empty? Then I will be glad those pieces are not in your basement. I will still not have committed the burglary. He seemed surprised. He had assumed I needed the safe to contain proof because he still understood this as a contest between siblings. I needed the truth, even if it was less convenient than vindication. My mother came to the doorway but did not join us. She held the empty velvet box against her chest. At 2:18, a uniformed officer stepped outside and spoke to Ortiz. The detective looked at me, then at my parents. The inner lock is open, she said. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, you may observe from the basement doorway. Claire, I need you to identify property, but do not touch anything. Across the street, Evan got out of the sedan. An officer blocked him at the curb. We entered the house together. My father first, then my mother, then me. Every step down the basement stairs crossed the grooves I had noticed after Sunday dinner. The air smelled of concrete dust and machine oil. 2 evidence technicians stood beside the open gray door. For a moment, no one moved. Then the police opened the inner compartment, and my family ran out of explanations. The first thing I saw was blue velvet. Grandma Celeste's lark pendant rested on top of a stack of document boxes, its seed pearl wings catching the basement light. My mother made a sound so small it seemed to come from someone much younger. An officer steadied her without letting her cross the evidence line. Beneath the pendant lay Aunt Miriam's emerald clips, Mrs. Varella's original presentation case, and tray after tray of inventory wrapped in tissue and labeled with our internal stock numbers. The missing loose diamonds were sealed inside plastic coin tubes. 6 vintage watches sat in travel rolls. 9 consignment pieces reported in the burglary appeared within minutes, but the jewelry was only the surface. The black equipment cases held cutting tools, disposable rain gear, shoe covers, and the broken interior cylinder from Hale and Finch's rear door. One rain jacket carried fibers and paint consistent with the alley entrance. A pair of boots had soles matching partial impressions photographed inside the stockroom. In a side pocket, police found a maintenance cap like the one worn by the man who entered my apartment. Dad gripped the doorframe. Evan said those were client files, he whispered. Some are, Ortiz replied. Please stay back. The files documented more than one crime. There were forged consignment agreements, altered appraisals, and photocopies of client identification. Evan had sold or pledged jewelry, then delayed account statements so owners would not discover the losses. he had borrowed against pieces Hale and Finch did not own. The burglary was meant to erase the inventory gap and trigger an insurance payment large enough to cover his debts. He had also prepared for the possibility that police would look beyond the obvious. An accordion folder bore my name. Inside were copies of my apartment lease, travel schedule, alarm code, and bank details. There was a prepaid phone registered using a variation of my name. Its message history included drafts of anonymous tips claiming I had approached private collectors with stolen goods. Police found a receipt for $18,000 withdrawn from a company emergency account, the same amount planted in my desk. At the bottom of the folder lay a handwritten page titled Sequence. 1. Remove C access. 2. Move family items. 3. Trigger code/rear door. 4. Varela plus cash in desk. 5. Cameras off 12:45. 6. Insurance list AM. The handwriting was Evan's. I knew the slanted capital S from birthday cards and inventory notes. A forensic examiner would later confirm it. My father asked to sit down. There was no chair, so an officer brought one from the workshop. He lowered himself slowly, staring at the page as if it were written in a language he could almost understand. My mother kept looking at the necklace. Then an evidence technician opened a smaller, fireproof box from the rear shelf. It contained the deed to my parents' house, 2 blank checks bearing forged versions of my mother's signature, and a home equity loan application for $300,000. The contact email belonged to Evan. The application had not yet funded, but it listed the property as collateral and described my parents as willing borrowers. That was the moment my father's loyalty broke. Not when he saw client property, not when he saw the plan to frame me. When he saw his house offered to strangers, he understood that Evan's love did not exempt them from being used. I wish I could say that realization satisfied me. Instead, it hurt in a different place. My innocence had been available in the same safe, yet the forged loan made the truth personal enough for Dad to accept. Outside, raised voices crossed the lawn. Evan had learned what officers were finding. He tried to leave before they completed the search. A patrol officer stopped the sedan at the corner. Ortiz received the call while technicians photographed the forged loan application. She listened, said, "Understood," and turned to my parents. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, we are placing your son under arrest. You may be contacted about additional financial documents. Do not destroy or alter anything." My mother swayed. I reached for her before I could decide whether I wanted to. She leaned against me and sobbed with the empty necklace box pressed between us. Dad did not move. When police led Evan past the front window, he looked toward the basement stairs. His hands were cuffed in front of him. For 1 second, his face became the face of the boy who used to hide broken toys under my bed and cry when I refused to confess. Then it hardened again. "Claire did this," he shouted. "She set all of it up. She's always wanted what I have." My father closed his eyes. My mother stepped away from me, walked to the window, and drew the curtain. It was not an apology. It was not repair. But it was the first boundary she had ever placed between her son and the people he harmed. The search lasted 9 hours. Police cataloged property from 23 clients, business records covering 4 years, 3 burner phones, counterfeit seals, debt ledgers, and the tools used in the staged burglary. The safe had been large enough to hold almost everything Evan feared losing: stolen wealth, forged authority, and the plan that turned his sister into an exit route. What it could not hold, once opened, was his story. The headlines changed faster than people did. The same local site that had called me a family insider published, "Jewelry executive arrested in staged burglary." My photograph disappeared from the article. No correction appeared beside the old insinuations. Customers who had avoided me sent messages saying they had known something was wrong all along. 2 museum clients asked when I might resume work. Vindication was less like applause than like strangers quietly returning objects they had taken from you and pretending they had never left with them. Evan was charged with insurance fraud, interstate transportation of stolen property, forgery, burglary, evidence tampering, identity theft, and attempted financial exploitation of our parents. Additional clients came forward. One widow had waited 8 months for payment on a necklace Evan claimed had not sold. Police found the sale invoice in the safe. A collector discovered that the ruby he bought through Evan had been pledged to another lender. Hale and Finch closed temporarily. The insurer appointed a forensic accounting team. The board removed Evan and asked me to serve as interim director. I declined. Dad came to Priya's office after the vote. He carried the old green ledger Grandpa had used during the store's first year, a gesture so carefully chosen it almost made me angry. "The company needs you," he said. "It needed me when I raised the alarm." "I know." "No, you know now. That is not the same thing." He nodded and stared at the ledger. I believed him because I wanted him to be the man I had told everyone he was. Every time you questioned him, it felt like you were questioning me. It was the first apology he offered without asking me to erase the consequence. "You let the police investigate me," I said. "You came to my apartment and suggested treatment for a crime I didn't commit. You stood behind him on television." "I did." "I can't return to the company and make that disappear." "I'm not asking you to disappear it." But he had asked exactly that for years, in smaller ways. Support your brother. Soften your tone. Let the family recover. I told him the board needed independent leadership, a compliance monitor, and full restitution to clients before Hale and Finch reopened. If he wanted my technical help, I would provide it under a written consulting agreement, at market rates, reporting to the insurer rather than to him. He accepted. My mother apologized differently. She brought no ledger and made no request. She came to Priya's house with Grandma's empty necklace box and sat at the kitchen table. The police still held the pendant as evidence. Mom ran her thumb over the worn velvet. "I knew you were angry about the promotion," she said. "I used that to make everything else easier to dismiss." "I was angry." "You had a right to be." I waited. "When Evan was little, he needed so much reassurance," she continued. "You seemed strong. We told ourselves that giving him more was kindness because you could manage without it. Then we forgot strength is not the same as not needing anyone." Her explanation did not absolve her. It did, however, name the mechanism of our family more accurately than jealousy ever had. "I don't know how to be your daughter right now," I said. "Then don't. Not until you choose to. I will keep trying to be your mother without demanding that you make me feel forgiven." We sat together for an hour. She cried only once. I did not comfort her. When she left, the box remained on the table, but I called before she reached home and told her she had forgotten it. Evan requested a meeting through his attorney. Priya advised against it unless there was a clear purpose. I had one question I could not stop carrying. Why had he needed to make me criminal rather than merely incompetent? The meeting took place through glass at the county detention center. Evan looked smaller without tailored clothes and a room arranged around his charm. "Did you ever plan to return the family pieces?" I asked. "Of course. They were collateral, temporary." "And the client pieces?" "I was fixing it. The insurance money would have covered everything." "You framed me." He leaned toward the glass. "You were always waiting for me to fail." "I was doing my job." "You wanted Dad to choose you." There it was again, jealousy refined into destiny. Evan could not imagine a world in which my objection to theft was about the people being robbed. In his mind, every principal was a weapon in a sibling contest, because that was how he used principles himself. "I did want them to choose me," I said, "but I never needed them to destroy you to do it. You needed them to destroy me." For once, he had no prepared answer. I ended the call and left. Evan did not go to trial. Faced with courier video, recovered property, financial records, tool marks, cloud backups, and his handwritten sequence, he accepted a plea agreement that required cooperation in locating sold items and identifying lenders. He received 11 years in state and federal custody, with restitution orders that would follow him long after release. Some relatives called the sentence excessive. They remembered the charming nephew at weddings, not the widow who nearly lost her home while waiting for her consignment payment. Aunt Miriam said prison would ruin him. I replied that he had made a series of decisions, not a single mistake. After that, family invitations became selective. I discovered peace could arrive disguised as being left off a group message. Hale and Finch survived, but not as the company my father had known. The board sold a minority interest to repay clients quickly. An outside director replaced family management. Every transfer required 2 independently authenticated signatures. Cameras stored footage off-site. Consignment funds entered protected accounts that no executive could borrow against. I spent 6 months helping reconstruct ownership histories. I sat with clients while police returned jewelry from evidence. Mrs. Varela cried when I placed her husband's watch on the table. She did not sell it. A charitable fund associated with the insurer covered her granddaughter's immediate treatment, and she decided the watch had already paid for something by bringing the truth into view. When Grandma's Lark pendant was released, my mother did not put it around her own neck. She asked me to meet her at a bank. Inside a private room, she slid the velvet box toward me. "I want you to have it." I almost refused. Gifts in our family had often carried invisible instructions. Why? Because your grandmother left it to me with a note saying I should pass it to the daughter who understood that value and price were different things. I assumed she meant someday. I think she meant when I was wise enough to see which daughter that was. "You don't have another daughter." Mom gave a sad smile. "No, I had one daughter, and I treated her as if being reliable meant she could wait forever." I accepted the pendant, but placed it in a new safe deposit box under my name. I wore it only once that year, at the opening of my own firm. I called the company Provenance House. We specialized in independent inventory controls, estate authentication, and fraud prevention for small museums, family dealers, and private collections. Miles joined as senior appraiser. Priya became outside counsel. Detective Ortiz refused a consulting role because of department rules, but agreed to speak at our first seminar after Evan's case was closed. Our opening reception took place in a converted print shop with exposed brick and no family portraits. My parents arrived separately. Dad brought flowers from the grocery store instead of a symbolic heirloom. I appreciated the restraint. He had begun therapy, which surprised everyone who knew him. He also resigned from Hale and Finch's board. In a letter to the remaining directors, he wrote that his failure to act on compliance warnings had enabled the loss. He did not call it a misunderstanding or a family tragedy. He called it a governance failure and attached his name. My mother volunteered with a nonprofit helping older adults recognize financial exploitation. She never used our story in her speeches without asking me. Sometimes change is visible not in grand apologies, but in the permissions people finally learn to request. We did not become a perfect family after the safe opened. Dad and I met for coffee twice a month, and some meetings ended after 20 minutes because he tried to explain Evan's childhood. Mom occasionally asked whether I might visit my brother. I always said no. She learned not to ask twice. Trust returned in teaspoons. One evening, nearly a year after the burglary, Dad admitted he had visited Evan in prison. I expected a plea for reconciliation. "He still says you were jealous," Dad told me. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the word had finally become too small to hold me. "What did you say?" Dad looked down at his coffee. I told him that even if you had envied every good thing he ever received, it would not have put stolen jewelry in his safe. Feelings are not evidence. I should have understood that before. It was not enough to restore what we had lost. It was enough to mark distance traveled. 2 years later, Hale and Finch celebrated its 75th anniversary. The new director invited me to speak about legacy and controls. I declined the keynote, but agreed to lend several early ledgers for an exhibition on Grandpa's methods. The old gray safe stood in the center of the gallery. After the criminal case, my parents had wanted it removed from their house. Dad suggested scrapping it. I asked the insurer to preserve it until every claim was resolved, then arranged for Hale and Finch to buy it from my parents for $1. A conservator cleaned the steel but left the drill marks around the lock. The exhibition label did not mention Evan by name. It explained that safes protect objects, while systems protect trust, and that neither works when authority is exempt from scrutiny. On the anniversary evening, clients moved through the gallery holding champagne. Mrs. Varela attended with her granddaughter, now healthy enough to complain about the music. Miles told the burglary story to a group of young appraisers, emphasizing chain of custody rather than family drama. Detective Ortiz stood near the back in civilian clothes. My parents arrived together. Mom wore a simple pearl pin. The lark pendant rested at my throat. Dad stopped in front of the safe. I hated that thing for a long time. So did I. Now I'm glad we didn't destroy it. I understood. Destroying the safe would have offered the illusion that the container caused what it held. Families do that with people too. They choose one person to carry every uncomfortable fact, then call the family healed when that person leaves. I had been chosen to carry jealousy, ambition, resentment, and eventually criminal suspicion. Once the evidence cleared me, I could have spent my life proving I was none of those things. Instead, I accepted the smaller truths. I had envied Evan sometimes. I had wanted recognition. I had resented my parents. None of those feelings made me dishonest. Human emotion was not a confession. The director tapped a glass and thanked everyone for coming. She spoke about Grandpa's first repair bench, Dad's expansion, the restitution process, and the controls that now made Hale and Finch safer. She thanked Provenance House for rebuilding the collection records. She did not call me a secret weapon. She called me by my name. After the reception, Mom asked if I would come to Sunday dinner. 2 years earlier, that table had been the place where my family chose Evan's story over my warning. I had avoided it since. "Who will be there?" I asked. "Just us. No speeches, no decisions about the future. Dinner." I considered the request. Boundaries were not walls I had to defend forever. They were doors whose locks belonged to me. "I'll come for an hour," I said. Mom nodded without asking for more. Before leaving, I returned to the safe alone. The gallery lights cast a dull shine across its open door. For the exhibition, the shelves held only copies of blank inventory forms, a photograph of Grandpa, and a short video explaining modern provenance controls. Nothing valuable was locked inside. That was deliberate. A safe can hide theft, debt, and a plan written in your brother's hand. It can hold the proof that forces people to see what love allowed them to ignore. But metal does not create truth. It only delays the moment truth is brought into the light. Evan had called me jealous because jealousy was easier for my parents to believe than fraud. My parents had believed him because his story asked them to protect the son they admired and punish the daughter who would survive it. The police opened the safe because facts, patiently gathered, finally gave the law permission to look where my family would not. What they found cleared my name, returned stolen property, and ended my brother's control. But the most important thing the safe gave me was not vindication. It was the knowledge that I no longer needed my parents' belief in order to trust myself. I closed the steel door without locking it and walked out of the gallery beneath my own name.